Hey guys, welcome back to Critics Math and Science Education. Today we're going to be talking about food chains versus food webs. So Critic, what is a food chain? A food chain is a series of organisms shown to reflect who eats who. A food chain only shows one type of feeding pattern for the specific organism or organisms in the food chain. Let's take a look at an example. I'm going to be giving an example of an ocean ecosystem. So, the producer for the ocean ecosystem would be kelp. Then, the kelp would be eaten by small fish. And the small fish would be eaten by seals. And then finally, the seals would be eaten by sharks. This is an example of a simple food chain. Food chains are quick diagrams and only show one type of feeding pattern between the different organisms. For example, seals only don't eat small fish. They eat many more organisms, which will be shown when I explain the food webs. Talking about food webs, let's talk about the definition. A food web is a complex network of interconnected food chains within an ecosystem, which means that there are many food chains found in a food web, which altogether make the continuous and interconnected relationships between the organisms, and that is called a food web. Let's take a look at an example. I'm going to be using the same ocean ecosystem as the example for the food web. So, as we did for a food chain, let's start with kelp as our producer, but also seaweed. Then, as we know, kelp gets eaten by small fish. And then small fish get eaten by seals. And then seals get eaten by sharks. That we already know. But let's take a look at but since this is a food chain, there's many different food. Since this is a food web, there are many different food chains in it. So let's start with seaweed. Also gets eaten by small fish, but it also gets eaten by crab. Then the crab gets eaten by turtles, and then the turtle gets eaten by the shark and also the seals. But I have one more thing to add. The shark is not the apex predator. The killer whale is. If you've never seen a killer whale, it's basically a whale that's black and white. That's all. That's the best definition I can explain it. But back to the food chains versus food webs. This is an example of a food web. Food webs are the perfect example of how scientists organize their info. Scientists use these because they perfectly demonstrate the different feeding relationships and different feeding patterns of all the organisms and how they're interconnected in an ecosystem. For example, in our case, it's an ocean ecosystem. Food webs express a more detailed diagram of the different feeding patterns and show the liveliness, complexiveness, and relationships between all kinds of organisms in the ecosystem. And as I said before, there are so many food chains that can be found in a food web. For example, we can take the food chain that I explained before as one, and then we can also take the new food chain that I created here with the turtle, crab, and seaweed, and we can also interconnect the seaweed with the small fish, with the other with the seaweed food chain and also the kelp food chain to create another food chain. These interconnected food chains all make up one thing, a food web. This food web is the best way and the scientists' main way to express ecosystems, feeding relationships, and also how they grow and how they eat each other for energy and food. The arrows express the flow of energy and show who eats who. Food webs are the ultimate diagram of an ecosystem that's found. If you ever want to do an experiment on how many different organisms there are or what are the different organisms in an ecosystem, always use food webs to express your thoughts and your questions. Even though if they're wrong, you can still correct them because all of the animals affect each other in some different way. This is Kritik from Math and Science Education, and peace. Peace.